This is where we take your sources, articles, research, maybe even your own notes, and we really try to distill the key insights, the most important takeaways to help you get truly well-informed on a topic.
And today we're diving into something pretty heavy, but incredibly important. It affects almost everyone, really, whether directly or indirectly.
Yeah, we're talking about the profound and often hidden impact of trauma, how it shapes our minds, our brains, our bodies.
It's unsettling when you look at the numbers, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, think about this research in the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, suggests that 1 in 5 Americans was sexually molested as a child.
1 in 5, that's huge.
And 1 in 4 was beaten by a parent, beaten severely enough that it left a mark.
Wow.
And maybe even more shocking, 1 in 3 couples engages in physical violence.
It paints a stark picture. These aren't, abstract figures from somewhere else.
Exactly. These are people we know, our friends, our families, our neighbors. They're living with this, often carrying this immense weight in secret.
And that's really our mission today, isn't it? To unpack what trauma actually means beyond just the painful event itself.
Right. How does it fundamentally reorganize our whole internal world? The way we think, the way we feel, how we connect with others, or don't.
And critically, we want to illuminate some of the pathways to healing, how people can learn to live fully in the present, not be trapped by the past.
We're drawing on a lot of really rich insights here. Expensive research, clinical experience, and particularly some groundbreaking work that explores why, for so many people, the body keeps the score.
That phrase really captures it, doesn't it? The body keeps the score.
It does. And when we talk about trauma, I think a lot of us immediately picture, soldiers, combat veterans, maybe survivors of big disasters.
Those are definitely forms of trauma, profound ones.
But the reality, as those stats suggest, is that trauma's reach is it's much closer than we think. It's pervasive, it's often silent, happening right here in our own communities, even in our own homes.
You've hit on such a critical point there. Those statistics you mentioned earlier, they're really just the tip of the iceberg.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. The CDC findings also show, for example, that 1 in 4 Americans grew up with alcoholic relatives. 1 out of 8 witnessed their mother being beaten or hit.
So it's woven into the fabric of many, many households.
Precisely. What's striking is that these aren't necessarily distant crises. It's not just about war zones or earthquakes. Trauma is often a deeply domestic issue. It's happening where we live, where we work, where we raise our families. It's like a quiet epidemic.
A quiet epidemic. I like that term. And it's insidious because it's often invisible, right? People don't talk about it.
Exactly. And what makes trauma, by its very definition, is how utterly unbearable it is. Intolerable.
So people just try to push it away.
Often, yes. Victims, whether they're, rape survivors, soldiers, children who've been abused, they often try desperately to push these horrific experiences out of their minds. They try to act like nothing happened, just move on.
But you can't just move on from something like that, can you?
Well, the effort it takes. The sheer amount of energy required just to function day to day while carrying the memory of terror, maybe the shame of feeling weak, that vulnerability. It's immense.
It sounds exhausting, like an internal battle nobody else sees.
It really is. It's constantly consuming their mental and emotional resources just to keep functioning.
That internal battle, it doesn't just stay inside, does it? It ripples outwards.
That's a crucial point. It has a profound ripple effect. Trauma doesn't just impact the person who went through it. It radiates. It affects everyone around them, often in really painful ways.
Can you give an example of that, how it plays out?
Sure. Think about a soldier returning from combat. Maybe he frightens his family with sudden outbursts of rage, or maybe he's just emotionally absent, numb.
Okay.
Well, his wife might become depressed, dealing with that day in, day out. And then their children. They might grow up feeling insecure, anxious, always walking on eggshells. It casts a very long shadow.
So it becomes this multi-generational thing,
Yes.
a relational consequence passed down.
Yes, exactly. It's not contained. Think about someone who was exposed to family violence as a child.
Right.
It often makes it incredibly difficult for them to build stable, trusting relationships when they're adults. They might unconsciously repeat patterns, or they might just shy away from intimacy altogether because deep down they learned that closeness isn't safe.
So personal suffering really isn't isolated. It affects families, communities.
Absolutely. It shapes how people interact, how they attach, sometimes for generations without anyone even realizing why these patterns keep happening.
That deep suffering radiating outwards, it makes you wonder, when did we really start to get a handle on this? As a society, I mean.
A lot of our modern understanding, it really started to solidify after a particularly tough period, the experiences of veterans, especially from the Vietnam War.
Ah, Vietnam. Right.
Yes, the lessons learned then were, well, they were sobering and incredibly formative for the whole field of trauma studies. I remember working with a Vietnam vet named Tom. He was a lawyer, successful, but he'd spend holidays hiding in his office downtown, drinking, looking at old photos, anything to avoid his family.
Why? What was he avoiding?
Triggers. He knew that noise, fireworks, even the summer heat, the thick leaves on the trees in his sister's yard. It would all just remind him of Vietnam, drive him crazy. He was terrified of being around his wife and kids when he got upset, afraid he'd become a monster, hurt them, so he'd storm out.
Sounds like the past was just constantly intruding on his present. You mentioned he was offered medication, but he refused.
He did, and his reason was, well, it was heartbreaking, really, but it gave such insight. He told me, if I take the pills and the nightmares go away, I will have abandoned my friends and their deaths will have been in vain. I need to be a living memorial.
Wow. A living memorial. So staying loyal to the dead was keeping him from living his own life.
Exactly. That loyalty, that need to be a living memorial, it was binding him to the past. It made us realize his suffering was so much more complex than just bad memories or, messed up brain chemistry. Trauma had fundamentally changed who he was.
And wasn't there something deeper, too? Something he'd done?
Yes. That was perhaps even worse for him than the flashbacks. The memory of his own actions.
What happened?
After his friend was killed in an ambush, Tom, well, he went into a frenzy. He went into a nearby village, and in his rage, he killed children, shot an innocent farmer, raped a Vietnamese woman.
Oh, my God.
It highlights this awful truth that trauma can be something done to you, or it can be something you yourself have done. And for Tom, those actions made it impossible for him to truly come home. How do you face your family, watch your own child learn to walk when you carry that? The shame, the guilt, it corroded everything, trust, intimacy. Gone.
So it's not just the event, it's the devastating internal fallout, the shame, the loss of self. And part of that loss, you mentioned, is this profound emotional numbness. You saw that in Tom.
Very clearly. He described feeling emotionally frozen, like he was living behind a glass wall, totally disconnected from everyone, even himself.
He couldn't feel anything for his family.
He couldn't evoke deep feelings, no. He said he hardly recognized himself in the mirror, just observing himself from a distance like he was floating in space. No purpose, no direction, except for those flashes of rage and that deep, abiding shame.
That numbing. It's a defense mechanism, isn't it?
Yeah.
But with a terrible cost.
Precisely. The mind tries to shield itself from overwhelming pain, but it shuts down the good feelings too.
And beyond the numbness, there are the flashbacks. You described them almost like violent reenactments. Do you have an example that really shows what that's like?
Yes, absolutely. There was a veteran named Bill. We were doing a Rorschach test, the ink blot test.
Okay.
When he saw the second card, it's the first one with color, which can sometimes cause a color shock. He just gasped in horror.
What did he see?
He yelled, "This is that child I saw being blown up in Vietnam. In the middle, you see the charred flesh, the wounds, the blood spurting out." He was panting, sweating, panicking right there in my office.
So he wasn't just remembering it.
No, he was reliving it. Seeing the images, smelling the smells, feeling the physical sensations from 10 years earlier, as if it was happening right then and there.
That sounds utterly terrifying, to be hijacked by your past like that. And was that common with the Rorschach test among veterans?
It was remarkably consistent. We tested 21 other veterans. 16 of them reacted similarly to that same card, seeing graphic wartime scenes.
Like what?
Things like, "These are the bowels of my friend Jim after a mortar shell ripped him open," or "This is the neck of my friend Danny after his head was blown off." There was no imagination, no butterflies or dancers like you might expect. It was just replaying this brutal old footage.
And the others, the ones who didn't see violence.
Even more alarming, the other 5 just went blank. They said, "This is nothing, just a bunch of ink." They'd lost the capacity for their minds to even play or associate freely.
So trauma either superimposes itself onto reality, making everything a trigger.
Or it just wipes the slate clean, affects the imagination itself, leaving a void. And the terror is, you never know when you'll be assaulted by these reenactments again. And you have no idea when they'll stop.
It's like being trapped in a state of constant alert, or maybe complete shutdown. Which brings us to this idea of dissociation you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
That it's really at the core of trauma. What's happening there?
Dissociation, yeah. It's essentially the mind's emergency brake. When an experience is just too overwhelming, too much to bear, the mind splits it off, compartmentalizes it.
Can you illustrate that?
We saw it so clearly with a couple, Stan and Ute, after a terrible car accident. We put them in a scanner. Stan relived the crash, intensely sweating, heart racing, blood pressure soaring. He is convinced he was going to die right there in the scanner.
She was in the same car, right?
Right next to him. But her response was the complete opposite. She went numb. Her mind went blank. Brain scans showed markedly decreased activity in almost every area. Her heart rate, her blood pressures are normal.
She felt nothing.
When we asked her how she felt during the scan, she said, "I felt just like I felt at the time of the accident. I felt nothing."
Wow. That contrast is incredible. One person reliving it intensely, the other feeling absolutely nothing.
It really highlights those two extreme but equally profound ways the brain tries to cope. Total overwhelm or total shutdown.
A critical insight. And all this intense suffering, particularly among the Vietnam vets, it eventually led to a major shift, didn't it, around 1980?
It did. 1980 was a watershed moment. A group of Vietnam veterans, with strong support from psychoanalysts in New York like James Chaton and Robert J. Lifton, successfully lobbied the American Psychiatric Association.
What did they achieve?
They got a new diagnosis recognized in the official manual, the DSM-3, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. It finally gave a name, a formal identification, to this cluster of symptoms so many veterans were experiencing.
Just having a name, a framework must have been huge.
Oh, incredibly significant. It provided this shared language, a name to the suffering that had previously been dismissed or misunderstood. And that recognition led directly to an explosion of research efforts to find effective treatments.
But it wasn't smooth sailing initially, was it? There was resistance.
There was. Early on, I actually submitted a grant proposal to the VA to study the biology of traumatic memories. The rejection letter started with, and I quote, "It has never been shown that PTSD is relevant to the mission of the Veterans Administration."
You're kidding.
Hard to believe now, right? But it shows just how much resistance there was initially to formally acknowledging and studying trauma. Thankfully, things have changed drastically since then.
It's amazing how far the field has come. And what's also striking is how this understanding started to broaden beyond just combat veterans. You began seeing similar patterns elsewhere.
Absolutely. After I left the VA, I started working at a large mental health center in Massachusetts. And I was suddenly hearing echoes of what I'd heard from the vets, but from different people. Particularly women. My experience with the veterans had sensitized me. I was listening differently. And I started hearing so many stories of childhood sexual abuse, family violence, from patients who were coming in for depression or anxiety.
But wasn't incest considered really rare back then?
That was the official line. The standard psychiatry textbook at the time claimed it was incredibly rare, maybe 1 in a million women. Yet almost half the women coming to my office, many with symptoms remarkably similar to combat vets, reported incest histories.
That discrepancy is horrifying. It suggests this huge, unacknowledged war at home, doesn't it?
It really does. We now understand that war isn't the only thing that shatters lives. While maybe a quarter of soldiers in war zones develop serious post-traumatic issues, think about this. 12 million women in the U.S. have been raped. More than half of those rapes happened when they were girls, under 15.
12 million.
And for so many people, the war starts at home. Every year, about 3 million children in the U.S. are reported as victims of abuse or neglect.
3 million children a year.
To put it bluntly, for every soldier serving overseas in a war zone, there are roughly 20 children being abused right here at home. It's not just individual tragedies, it's a massive societal pattern.
That scale is just devastating. Which brings us to the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That really blew the lid off this connection between childhood trauma and long-term health, didn't it? And it started kind of by accident.
It did, in a completely unexpected place, an obesity clinic. Dr. Vincent Felitti at Kaiser Permanente in San Diego ran this clinic. He had a patient, a young nurse's aide, who lost a huge amount of weight, going from over 400 pounds down to about 130.
Wow, that's dramatic.
Extremely. But then she rapidly gained it all back. It happened after a male coworker flirted with her. She went home and just started eating uncontrollably, even sleepwalking to eat.
What triggered such an extreme reaction?
When Felitti gently probed, she revealed a long history of incest involving her grandfather.
So a physical health issue, obesity, was deeply rooted in trauma.
Exactly, and this was only the second case of incest Felitti had encountered in over 20 years of practice. But then, just days later, another patient told a similar story. As he and his team started asking more questions, they were shocked. They found that most of their morbidly obese patients had been sexually abused as children.
That accidental discovery led to the formal ACE study.
Yes, it prompted them to launch a large-scale investigation. They defined 10 specific categories of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs.
What kind of experiences were included?
Things like physical, sexual, or emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, and also household dysfunction like parental divorce, mental illness, addiction, incarceration, or domestic violence.
Okay. And what did they find when they surveyed people?
They surveyed over 17,000 Kaiser patients, mostly white, middle-class, educated, financially stable people. The results were startling. Only about one-third reported no ACEs at all.
Only a third, in that relatively privileged group.
Right. More than a quarter said they were physically abused as kids. 1 in 5 women reported sexual abuse. These experiences were far more common than anyone had realized, even in supposedly stable environments.
And it wasn't just about single incidents, was it? The study found these things often cluster together.
That's a crucial finding. ACEs rarely happen in isolation. If one thing is going wrong in a household, often other things are too. Abuse incidents aren't usually one-offs.
And the more ACEs someone experienced,
The higher the toll later in life. It's a cumulative effect. Higher ACE scores strongly correlated with learning and behavior problems in school, more missed workdays, financial struggles, lower lifetime income.
and mental health.
A huge impact. Chronic depression in adulthood skyrockets with ACE scores. For women with an ACE score of 4 or more, the rate of chronic depression was 66%.
66%. That's staggering. It really shows how the roots of so many adult problems lie in childhood trauma.
Absolutely. It shifts the perspective from just looking at individual behaviors or illnesses to understanding their origins in early adversity.
And that connection back to obesity, where it all started. The idea that weight could be protective.
It's a tragic adaptation, really. One woman, a rape victim, told Flitty, "Overweight is overlooked, and that's the way I need to be." For some men, too, weight offered protection. Flitty mentioned 2 prison guards in his program who quickly regained weight because they felt safer being the biggest guy on the cell block. Another patient became obese after moving in with a violent grandfather. He said, "It wasn't that I ate because I was hungry. It was just a place for me to feel safe."
So what looks like an unhealthy behavior can actually be a hidden survival strategy.
Exactly. It highlights these complex, often unseen ways people try to cope with unbearable situations.
The ACE study really revealed this massive public health crisis then, something far bigger than just individual cases.
It did. Robert Akenda, one of the lead researchers, concluded that child abuse is arguably the nation's single largest public health problem. He calculated that its overall costs, healthcare, criminal justice, lost productivity, actually exceed the costs of cancer or heart disease.
More than cancer or heart disease. That's incredible.
His prediction was that if we could somehow eradicate child abuse, we could cut depression rates by more than half, alcoholism by 2/3, and dramatically reduce suicide, IV drug use, domestic violence. It would transform society.
A tearful but undeniable conclusion, as you said. Treating symptoms without tackling the root causes. It's just not enough.
It's ultimately a losing battle.
And yet, despite these powerful insights, there's still a strong tendency, particularly in psychiatry, towards what's often called the brain disease model, focusing heavily on medication.
That's a significant critique, yes. We've seen enormous spending on psychotropic drugs. The Department of Defense and the VA spent over $4.5 billion on them in just 1 decade.
Billion, with a B.
Billion. And you see things like Johnson & Johnson paying over $2 billion in fines for improperly marketing antipsychotics like Risperdal to vulnerable groups, including children.
And kids are actually taking these drugs.
500,000 children in the U.S. are currently on antipsychotics. And low-income kids are 4 times more likely to get them, often not for psychosis, but just to make them more manageable, more tractable.
So it's about controlling behavior rather than addressing the underlying distress.
That's the concern. And often, the effectiveness isn't even clear, especially for complex trauma symptoms.
How so?
Well, for example, standard antidepressants like Prozac showed little to no effect on PTSD symptoms in combat veterans. For civilians, there are issues with addiction potential, but more fundamentally, things like dissociation, self-harm, those fragmented memories, they often just don't respond well to these medications alone.
So the brain disease model is missing something crucial.
It often overlooks 4 fundamental truths about healing. First, our incredible capacity to heal each other through relationships, community, connection. Second, the power of language finding words for our experiences, creating meaning. Third, our ability to regulate our own physiology through simple things like breathing, movement, touch. And fourth, our power to change social conditions to create environments where people actually feel safe and can thrive.
When we ignore those things, we're just offering a chemical bandage.
In many cases, yes. We strip away people's agency and the potential for deeper, more integrated healing.
Okay, so if trauma isn't just a bad memory or a diagnosis, but this imprint, how did that imprint actually reorganize our mind, brain, and body? It sounds like it goes way beyond just thinking about the past event.
That's exactly it. Trauma isn't just the event that happened back then, it's the imprint left by that experience on mind, brain, and body. It has ongoing consequences for how we manage to survive right now in the present.
So the body still feels like the danger is present.
In many ways, yes. The imprint changes not just how we think or what we think about, but our very capacity to think clearly. That's why just telling the story, while important, often isn't enough. The body itself needs to learn on a deep, visceral level that the danger has passed. It needs to inhabit the reality of the present, not the echo of the past threat.
And a big part of that reorganization happens in the brain itself, right? Especially how the different sides of the brain work and our higher level executive functions. What does that look like?
Our brain hemispheres really do have different jobs, different languages, if you will. The right brain is more intuitive, emotional, visual, spatial. It develops first and handles that early nonverbal communication, like between a mother and baby.
Okay. And the left brain?
The left brain is more about language, sequence, analysis. It comes online more as kids learn to talk. It helps us name things, understand cause and effect, put things in order, communicate logically. Normally, they work together seamlessly.
But trauma disrupts that balance.
It does. It can lead to a profound loss of executive functioning. Trauma can actually deactivate parts of the left hemisphere, especially an area called Broca's area.
And Broca's area is important for?
It's crucial for organizing our experience into logical sequences and translating feelings and perceptions into words. Without that sequencing ability, it's hard to see cause and effect, grasp long-term consequences, make coherent plans, even just tell a clear story about what happened.
So when people feel like they're losing their minds under stress,
they're literally experiencing a temporary shutdown of these crucial executive functions. They're struggling to process, to sequence, to articulate. It's a neurological reality, not just an emotional overreaction.
that's a fundamental shift. And it connects to what you call the brain's smoke detector, the amygdala, getting stuck on high alert. How does that work?
Right. In PTSD, the balance shifts dramatically. The amygdala, our brain's smoke detector, always scanning for danger, becomes overactive. At the same time, the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC, which is like the watchtower, the rational part that helps us assess threats calmly and regulate emotions, becomes underactive.
So the alarm system is hypersensitive and the calming system is offline.
Essentially, yes. This imbalance makes it much harder to control emotions and impulses. Brain scans show that intense fear, sadness, anger, they all ramp up activity in those deeper emotional regions and decrease activity in the frontal lobe, especially the MPFC.
And what happens when the frontal lobe's control breaks down?
People can take leave of their senses, as the saying goes. They might startle violently at loud noises, fly into a rage over minor frustrations, freeze up when someone touches them unexpectedly. Trauma basically wires the brain to be constantly scanning for danger, even when objectively safe, making it incredibly hard to feel present or calm.
It sounds like that primal fight, flight, or freeze response just gets jammed on. They're stuck in that state.
That's a great way to put it. Traumatized individuals often feel trapped or immobilized. Their natural self-defense responses, fight or flight, were thwarted or useless during the trauma, so they end up stuck in either extreme agitation or a kind of collapse.
But you mentioned an example of an adaptive response.
Yeah.
With the boy after 9/11, Noam.
Yes, little Noam. After witnessing 9/11, he drew a picture of the towers, people jumping, but at the bottom, he drew it a trampoline.
A trampoline.
Yes, he had processed the event actively, he ran away, he became an agent in his own rescue. And once he felt safe, his brain quieted down enough for his imagination to kick in and create this life-saving trampoline. It showed that even a terrifying experience can be processed if the person can take action and regain a sense of safety.
And the vagus nerve is key in all these physical responses and emotional regulation, connecting it back to our social connections.
Absolutely. Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory is brilliant here. It links our social relationships directly to how we understand trauma responses. Our autonomic nervous system basically regulates 3 states, depending on how safe we feel.
What are those states?
Well, first, if we feel threatened but still somewhat safe, our most sophisticated response is social engagement. We call for help, seek comfort, use facial expressions, tone of voice that's mediated by the newer part of the vagus nerve, the ventral vagal complex.
Okay, reaching out. What if that doesn't work?
If that fails, or the danger is immediate, we shift to fight or flight mobilizing energy for action through the sympathetic nervous system. Heart pounds, muscles tense.
Right, and third state.
If fight or flight also fails, if we're trapped, held down, overwhelmed, the organism resorts to the oldest pathway. Freeze or collapse. It shuts down, conserves energy. That's mediated by the dorsal vagal complex. And that immobilization, that shutdown, is at the root of so many traumatic experiences.
So those gut-wrenching feelings, that heartbreak, it's literally the vagus nerve registering distress.
It is. The vagus nerve runs right through our core, connecting brain to gut, heart, lungs. It's the physical pathway for those deep emotional pains.
That explains the physical side. But there's that strange paradox, isn't there? Why some traumatized people seem drawn back to pain or danger.
It's complex and often misunderstood. Richard Solomon's theory of paradoxical addictions helps explain it. He showed how the body adapts. While some things, like drugs, give immediate pleasure, other activities that are initially unpleasant or even terrifying, like extreme sports, marathon running,
Or even self-harm.
or even self-harm, yes, can become paradoxically compelling or even enjoyable over time.
How does that happen?
The body adjusts its chemical balance. The sustained release of stress hormones and endorphins during these intense experiences can eventually create a powerful sensation, maybe even a sense of aliveness or control, that temporarily overrides the feeling of numbness or emptiness that often accompanies trauma.
So the pain makes them feel something when they otherwise feel dead inside.
That's often the dynamic. Like Sherry, the patient who picked her skin until she bled, she said it gave her some relief from feeling numb. The physical sensation, even though painful and shameful later, provided a momentary jolt, a feeling of being real. It's a tragic attempt to escape the void.
Tragic adaptation. That phrase keeps coming up. And it seems central to how trauma makes people lose connection with their own bodies.
It really is. So many trauma survivors literally cannot feel parts of their own bodies. They might struggle to identify objects just by touch because their brain isn't properly integrating sensory information.
And even when they're not actively thinking about the trauma,
Even then, Ruth Lanius did fascinating research on the brain's default state network, kind of the idling state in trauma survivors. She found that the areas responsible for transmitting visceral feelings, gut feelings, body sensations were largely shut down.
so to shut off the terrifying feelings.
They inadvertently deadened their capacity to feel fully alive. It's a profound disconnection. They learn to hide from themselves, physically and emotionally.
And this links to that term alexithymia, not having words for feelings.
Exactly. Alexithymia. People literally can't describe what they're feeling because they can't identify what their internal physical sensations mean. They might look furious but deny being angry. They might seem terrified but say they're fine.
So instead of feeling emotions, they feel.
Physical symptoms,
Yeah.
chronic pain, gut issues, headaches, things with no clear medical cause. They substitute the language of action for that of emotion. Ask them how they'd feel if a truck was speeding towards them. They might say, I'd jump out of the way, not, I'd be terrified. They're in their bodies, but disconnected from the emotional meaning of their sensations.
And sometimes this goes even further into depersonalization, losing the sense of self entirely.
Yes, that's like a step further down on the ladder to self-oblivion, losing your fundamental sense of who you are. Yude's blank brain scan after the car accident is a stark example. I even experienced it briefly myself during a mugging, feeling like I was floating above, watching it happen to someone else.
That complete detachment must be terrifying.
It is. And for children who grow up with abuse, this distorted perception means the whole world is filled with triggers. They see threats everywhere, imagine disastrous outcomes in normal situations. It leads to what looks like bizarre behavior, but it's driven by this constant underlying terror and misinterpretation of safety cues. The world becomes an inherently chaotic and dangerous place.
It's clear just how deep and pervasive this imprint is. But thankfully, this deep dive isn't just about the damage. There are pathways to healing, right? Ways to rewire the brain, reorganize the mind. And it seems like it has to start with connection, with relationships.
Absolutely fundamental. Reclaiming connection is the bedrock. Being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Social support is, by far, the most powerful buffer against being overwhelmed by stress and trauma.
And our earliest relationships literally shape our brains.
They do. Early caregiving sculpts brain development, creates our internal maps for relationships. If parents are unpredictable or frightening, children often become chronically nervous and non-adventurous. And research shows emotional withdrawal by a caregiver just being unavailable has perhaps the most profound and lasting negative impact on a child's ability to self-regulate and form secure attachments later in life.
Which means the therapeutic relationship itself becomes incredibly important. It's not just about techniques, but about the connection.
It's paramount. The key question isn't just what's the diagnosis, but rather, do you feel that your therapist is curious to find out who you are, what you need? Not just treating a generic PTSD patient. It needs to be a collaboration, a mutual exploration. For someone brutalized as a child, sometimes just finding one memory of feeling safe, even briefly, with a teacher or a neighbor, can be the tiny seed from which connection can start to grow again.
And beyond relationships, there's the power of story. Finding words for experiences and feelings that have been silenced for so long.
Silence, death. That slogan from the AIDS crisis applies so powerfully here, too. Silence about trauma deepens the isolation, the feeling of being utterly alone.
So speaking it is the first step.
Being able to say it out loud to another person, I was raped, I was abused, I'm not coping since I got back from the war. That's a fundamental sign that healing can begin. Naming the experience offers a different kind of control. It makes the unspeakable manageable, shareable.
The Vietnam veteran Karl Marlantes wrote about this struggle, didn't he? That internal split.
He did, very powerfully. He talked about discovering this terrible split inside himself after combat, a part of him that actually loved the violence, coexisting with a part that was horrified by it. His recovery demanded learning to tell the truth, even if that truth was brutally painful. He had to integrate all of it, the rage, the sadness, the actions, to become whole.
It reminds me of Helen Keller's story, too. How language unlocked everything for her.
A beautiful example. After illness left her deaf and blind, she was this isolated, almost feral child. Then her teacher, Anne Sullivan, spelled W-A-T-E-R into her hand while water ran over the other. Helen described it as that word startling her soul, awakening her mind from a darkened chamber. Language gave her thought, self-awareness I am, and crucially, connection to others. Language is how we share our deepest pain and deepest feelings. It's fundamental.
And what if talking feels too difficult? Can writing help access that inner world?
Oh, definitely. Writing, especially free writing just for yourself, can be incredibly powerful. It lets you bypass that internal social editor that often keeps us guarded when talking to others. Surprising truths can emerge.
Is there evidence it helps physically, too?
Yes. Studies have shown significant benefits. James Pennebaker's research found students who wrote about their deepest thoughts and feelings surrounding traumas, the facts and the emotions had a 50% drop in doctor visits afterwards compared to control groups. Their immune function improved too. It helps access those self-observing narrative parts of the brain.
Okay, so beyond relationships and language, modern therapy has developed some really innovative approaches that target the physical and neurological aspects directly. Let's talk about EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing. It sounds quite unique.
EMDR is fascinating and often remarkably effective. I remember a patient, Maggie. During an EMDR training, she had this vivid memory of her father raping her when she was 7. She felt it from inside her child's body, how small she was, his size, the smell of alcohol.
That sounds incredibly intense.
It was, but here's the crucial part. She was simultaneously able to observe it from the point of view of her 29-year-old self. She cried, but then said, "It's over now. It wasn't my fault. There was nothing I could do." It allowed her to revisit the trauma without being completely re-traumatized, bringing her adult perspective to bear.
So it's like integrating the past memory with the present reality of safety. How does it work, the eye movements?
The theory is that the bilateral stimulation, the back and forth eye movements, or sometimes taps or sounds, loosens up something in the mind brain. It seems to give faster access to associated memories and images, helping put the trauma into a larger context. You observe the experience differently. And interestingly, it often works relatively quickly, sometimes even without needing a deep therapeutic relationship beforehand.
It's different from just suppressing the memory with drugs.
Very different. Drugs might blunt the feeling, but EMDR aims to integrate the memory, so it becomes a coherent part of your past story, something that happened but is now over. One hypothesis links it to REM sleep, the stage where our brains naturally process and consolidate memories, which also helps with depression.
Can you share another example of that integration?
Sure. Kathy, another patient using EMDR. During a session processing her father's abuse, she felt intense fear and shame. But as she continued the eye movements, this image came to her. My big me holding my little me saying, "You are safe now."
Wow. the adult self comforting the child self.
Exactly. It's that integration. She later said, "I feel like I'm alive and that it is all over." It creates a new internal experience of safety around the old memory.
That's powerful. Now, what about therapies that focus even more directly on the body? Things like sensormotor psychotherapy, somatic experiencing, or even yoga. How do they tackle that physical imprint?
These approaches really shift the focus. They prioritize exploring physical sensations and discovering the location and shape of the imprints of past trauma on the body. The narrative, the story of what happened, often takes a backseat to the direct physical experience because the body remembers.
So how do you work with those sensations without overwhelming the person?
Peter Levine, the developer of somatic experiencing, talks about pendulation, gently moving back and forth, dipping into the internal sensations or traumatic memories, then returning to a place of resource or safety. It gradually expands the person's window of tolerance, their capacity to feel without shutting down or getting flooded.
And you mentioned completing actions,
Rope.
physically.
Yes. A key part is helping people discover the physical impulses that were suppressed during the trauma, the urge to hit, to push away, to run, and then allowing them to complete those actions, maybe through very subtle movements in therapy. This brings back a sense of agency, the pleasure of completed action that was lost.
Is there a real-world example of that?
The model mugging program is a powerful one. It specifically trains women, and men too, to overcome the freeze response. They practice transforming fear into effective fighting energy, literally reconditioning their physical responses. One woman who took the course after being initially frozen in a simulated attack later fought off real attackers on the street by confidently challenging them. They ran away. It rewired her response from helplessness to effective action.
And yoga. Your own research showed benefits there too.
We did. Our studies found 10 weeks of trauma-informed yoga significantly improved arousal issues, overall PTSD symptoms, and people's relationship with their bodies, even when DBT, another therapy, didn't show the same bodily benefits.
What was the experience like for participants?
One patient, Annie, found it terrifying at first. The intense physical sensations triggered her internal alarm system. But she persisted, realizing it was about looking inward and listening to my body, something her survival had depended on never doing. She later wrote, "Your body has things to say." Yoga helps reconnect with that inner world, tackling the numbness and alexithymia. It fosters a more caring relationship with the self.
These therapies all seem to involve integrating different parts of the self that trauma fragmented, which leads us nicely into internal family systems, or IFS. That model explicitly talks about parts, right?
IFS is a really elegant and compassionate model, yes. It sees dissociation not just as splitting off memories, but as the entire self-system breaking down into different parts, often polarized parts like intense self-loathing, existing alongside feelings of grandiosity.
What kinds of parts does IFS identify?
It mainly talks about three groups. First, the exiles. These are the young, vulnerable, childlike parts that hold the raw pain, terror, shame, and betrayal from the abuse or trauma. They're often locked away, hidden, like a toxic waste dump the system tries to contain.
Okay, the wounded parts. Then what?
Then you have the managers. These are protective parts that work hard to keep the exiles locked up, to prevent them from flooding the system. They might manifest as being highly critical, perfectionistic, controlling, people-pleasing, trying to manage life and avoid triggers.
And the third group?
The firefighters. These are also protectors, but they're emergency responders. When an exile's pain threatens to break through, firefighters react impulsively and intensely to extinguish the feeling immediately, often using extreme measures like substance abuse, binge eating, self-harm, rage, or dissociation. They're trying to put out the fire, but sometimes they burn the house down in the process.
That makes sense. So the goal isn't to get rid of these parts.
Not at all. The goal is to understand them, appreciate their protective intentions, even if their methods are harmful, and heal the underlying wounds they're protecting. IFS believes that beneath all these parts, everyone has a core self.
An undamaged self.
Yes, an undamaged essence that is inherently calm, confident, curious, compassionate, creative, connected. The self can witness the parts without being overwhelmed by them and can actually lead the inner system, building relationships with the parts.
How does that work in therapy?
It involves helping people unblend from their parts. So instead of saying, "I want to kill myself," they can learn to recognize, okay, a part of me feels like it wants to die. This creates space. The self can then approach that part with curiosity and compassion, understand its pain, and offer it what it needs.
That sounds incredibly empowering. And you mentioned research showing it helps even with physical conditions.
Yes, Nancy Shattuck's study on patients with rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune disease was fascinating. Using IFS, patients learned to approach their physical pain and their feelings about it with more curiosity and compassion. This led to significant improvements in their self-reported pain levels, physical functioning, depression scores, and sense of self-efficacy. Changing their internal relationship changed their experience of the illness.
Can you share an example of how IFS helped someone personally?
Peter, the doctor we mentioned earlier, critical, detached. His wife felt constantly criticized, emotionally shut out. He recognized this pattern but felt helpless. Through IFS, he started by getting curious about his critical part.
What did he discover?
He asked it what it was afraid would happen if it stopped criticizing. The part revealed its job was to protect him from hurt and humiliation. If you criticize others first, they won't dare hurt you. Later, accessing his core self, he was able to witness a memory of his father beating him, feeling the terror and grief of that little boy part in exile.
And he could offer compassion to that part.
Yes. From his self, he could offer that terrified boy compassion and understanding. This began to heal the exile, lessening the need for the critical manager part. Peter started to change, becoming more present and compassionate as a doctor, husband, and father. He could finally grieve.
That's a profound shift. Okay, another unique approach is psychomotor therapy, or structures. This sounds almost like psychodrama, creating scenes.
It has similarities, yes. Developed by Albert Pesso, it involves creating these three-dimensional tableaus or structures in a group setting. Group members are chosen to play roles significant people from the protagonist's past, or even ideal figures like an ideal mother or ideal father.
So the person directs their own play.
Exactly. The protagonist directs the scene, placing the role players, expressing what they felt, saw, and importantly, saying things they couldn't say at the time. They can also direct the role players to provide what was missing, like having the ideal mother stand up to an abusive father figure.
And experiencing that, even in a role play, creates change.
It creates a powerful corrective emotional experience. People often report deep visceral relief, a feeling of unburdening, because their body and mind get to experience a different, more positive outcome. There's also often a witness figure, someone just observing non-judgmentally, mirroring the protagonist's feelings, which helps create safety.
So it allows past and present, adult and child selves to coexist and rewrite the inner experience.
Precisely. It often induces a kind of light trance state where these different realities can coexist, leading to very concrete aha moments and a felt sense of resolution or repair. It's about generating new, tangible experiences of safety and agency within the old story.
And finally, neurofeedback. This works directly with brainwaves. How does that help with trauma?
Neurofeedback essentially trains the brain to shift out of dysfunctional brainwave patterns associated with trauma, like hypervigilance or dissociation, and into healthier, more regulated patterns. This can significantly impact feelings of safety, calmness, and engagement.
Can you give an example of its effect?
Lisa, the patient with severe dissociation we talked about, she constantly heard this hum of low-level conversations in her head, which terrified her. After about 6 months of neurofeedback training aimed at stabilizing her brainwaves, those noises stopped.
Just stopped.
Yes. She described it as, I integrated, I guess. Everything just came together. It was a profound shift from internal fragmentation to a sense of wholeness.
And how did that affect her life?
She became able to actually engage in therapy more deeply, to connect with people based on genuine feeling rather than just fearfully trying to figure them out. She could reflect on her anxiety, distinguish past triggers from present reality. Studies have shown neurofeedback can reduce PTSD symptoms, decrease hospitalizations, and help with related issues like substance abuse, which is very common in trauma survivors. It helps rewire the brain's fundamental patterns of arousal and regulation.
This overview of therapies is incredible. It really highlights that healing isn't one size fits all. There are many different doors into recovery.
Absolutely. Different approaches resonate with different people, and often a combination is most helpful at different stages of the journey.
But is there a common thread, a core principle underlying all these successful approaches?
I think the royal road, as Freud might have said, to healing the emotional brain is through conscious self-awareness, what we call interoception, noticing our inner experience. Neuroscience shows that activating the medial prefrontal cortex, that observing watchtower, is key. The only way we can change the way we feel is by becoming aware of our inner experience and learning to befriend what is going inside ourselves.
Which means facing the very feelings that traumatized people are often terrified of because their own bodies have felt like the enemy.
Exactly. Learning to breathe calmly through distress, practicing mindfulness, learning to distinguish this is a sensation from the past from this is what's happening now. These are crucial skills. It's about gently expanding that window of tolerance.
And when that happens, when someone reconnects with their body, finds language, integrates the fragments,
When nobody becomes somebody, again, as one writer put it, then self-awareness and language can weave those fragmented experiences into a coherent life story. It allows people to finally live fully in the present, not perpetually haunted by the ghosts of the past.
this whole deep dive really forces us to look beyond the individual, though. If trauma is so widespread, so rooted in things like abuse and neglect, what does this mean for us as a society? How do we heal collectively? How do we prevent it?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? It's a public health imperative. As long as we continue to live in denial and treat only trauma while ignoring its origins, we are bound to fail. We can't just keep treating symptoms.
We have to look at the breeding grounds.
Exactly. Poverty, unemployment, failing schools, social isolation, easy access to guns, unstable housing. These conditions create environments where trauma flourishes.
Yeah.
And the tragic reality is hurt people hurt other people. Ignoring the systemic roots just perpetuates the cycle.
The cost of inaction must be enormous. Thinking about incarceration rates, healthcare costs.
It's staggering. Look at the U.S. incarceration rate compared to countries like Norway or the Netherlands. And the fact that 70% of prisoners in California were once in foster care tells a powerful story.
So countries that invest more in prevention, family support, parental leave, quality childcare, see better outcomes.
The correlation is strong. It points to a fundamentally different approach, prioritizing community well-being and prevention. We have a long history of denial, too. Think back to WWI, labeling shell shock as cowardice or a character defect, punishing soldiers instead of helping them. That minimization has deep roots.
So the path forward involves building trauma-informed communities, recognizing this impact systemically.
It's essential. The creation of the National Child Traumatic Stress Network back in 2001 was a vital step. It acknowledged that childhood trauma is fundamentally different from adult trauma and needs comprehensive, system-wide solutions.
And where's a key place to start making changes?
Schools. Schools need to become islands of safety. We should be teaching self-awareness, self-regulation, communication skills as core curriculum, right alongside reading and math. These are foundational life skills, especially for kids coming from chaotic homes.
It means changing how teachers view challenging behavior.
Absolutely. Shifting the perspective from what's wrong with this kid to what happened to this kid. Understanding disruptive behavior not as defiance, but often as a frustrated attempt to communicate distress or a misguided attempt to survive.
So instead of punishment.
The first step is to help the child calm down. Then, explore the causes. Provide practical tools, maybe a breathing star for deep breaths or sensory aids. And simple things matter, greeting kids by name, making eye contact, daily check-ins. These small acts build safety and connection, offering a corrective experience for kids who may never have felt seen or known.
And fostering competence, a sense of agency, is also key, as a defense against that helplessness.
Hugely important. Programs that focus on building competence, like theater programs for foster youth, for example, are incredibly valuable. Competence is the best defense against the helplessness of trauma. When kids can work side by side with adults to create something, to see their vision realized, it gives them a sense of control, of mastery that directly counters the powerlessness they may have experienced.
So we've covered a vast territory today, from the shocking prevalence of trauma hidden in plain sight to its deep imprints on our brains and bodies. We've explored how understanding its origins is vital and how these innovative therapies, EMDR, IFS, bodywork, neurofeedback, offer real pathways to integrate the past and reclaim the present.
And we've touched on society's crucial role, how our systems can either perpetuate trauma or actively work to prevent it and promote healing.
It really brings it back to that fundamental human need for connection and safety, doesn't it?
It does. There's a quote that captures it beautifully. As long as we feel safely held in the hearts and minds of the people who love us, we will climb mountains and cross deserts and stay up all night to finish projects.
That's an incredible testament to resilience. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners. Consider this. What would it truly mean for our society, for all of us, if we genuinely committed to ensuring that every single child, every person, felt safely held, cherished, seen? What mountains could we collectively climb then?
What stands out for you from today's deep dive?
How might a deeper understanding of trauma change how you see yourself, your relationships, or maybe the community around you? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.